You cannot beat a river into submission. You have to surrender to its current and use its power as your own.
So what's your podcast about?
Oh, it's about psychology, true crime, supernatural stuff, the occasional paranormal or philosophical rant.
Well, maybe I could check it out sometime.
Don't speak negatively about yourself, even as a joke. Your body doesn't know the difference. Words are energy and they cast spells. Change the way you speak about yourself, and you can change your life.
There are two wolves, and they're always fighting. One is darkness and despair. The other is light and hope. Which wolf wins?
Whichever one you feed.
No matter what anybody tells you, words and ideas can change the world. And the human race is filled with passion.
The stories never made any sense to me.
Because humans are complicated beasts. You believe comforting lies while knowing full well the painful truth that make those lies necessary.
Poetry, beauty, romance, love. These are what we stay alive for. And you are here. Life exists, and identity. Powerful play goes on, and you may contribute a verse.
In the end, it is not important what you think. It is only important what you do.
This is your nautical lantern on the dangerous seas of darkness. Let's push off from the placid shore of the status quo and explore what's beyond the horizon. I am your host, BT, and this is Truth and Shadow, your podcast of the supernatural. There is an old saying that we become the stories we tell ourselves. Most of us hear something like that and immediately file it away under the category of inspirational quotes that sound profound, but don't actually mean much. Yet the older I get, the more I find myself wondering if there's something disturbingly true hidden within that idea. Not because our lives are fiction, and certainly not because reality is whatever we decide it should be, but because every human being lives inside a narrative. We take the raw events of our lives and weave them together into a story that explains who we are, why we are here, and what it all means. The strange thing is that most of us never notice we are doing it. Think about the stories people tell when asked to describe themselves. One person may call themselves a survivor, another a victim. Another one says that they live their life in a very unlucky way. Another's blessed. Another person believes they are the hero of their story. And sometimes, you'll hear people believe that they are the side character in someone else's life. The facts of their lives may be surprisingly similar, yet the narratives they construct around those facts can be radically different. That observation sits at the heart of something known as narrative therapy, a psychological approach that asks quite a simple question. What story are you telling about your life, and is that story helping you see the truth? Now, before some of you hear the word therapy and begin mentally clocking out, stay with me for a moment. This isn't going to be a discussion about lying to yourself or creating a fantasy version of reality where every setback becomes a blessing and every hardship is an opportunity. If anything, narrative therapy begins with a much more uncomfortable realization. It asks us to confront the possibility that many of the stories we tell ourselves were written during moments of pain, fear, grief, embarrassment, or failure, and that we have been reading from those pages ever since. Imagine a man who loses his job he has held for 20 years, a week before his retirement, before he would get his pension. Now, the event itself is painful, but the story he constructs around it can be even more powerful. He may begin telling himself that he is a failure. Every future disappointment gets added to that narrative. Every success, he just minimalizes it. Every opportunity becomes evidence either supporting or threatening the story he already believes. Eventually, he is no longer simply a man who had lost a job. In his own mind, he is the symbol of failure. Or imagine a young woman who experiences betrayal in a relationship. The betrayal is real. The hurt is real. But somewhere along the way, the story changes from someone hurt me to I am unworthy to love, that I'm always going to get hurt. That event becomes an identity. And that small page in your book becomes an entire chapter, if not the entire book. What fascinates me about this is how naturally we do it. We seem almost incapable of existing without stories. Long before psychology departments and counseling offices ever existed, people were sitting around fires telling stories. Ancient civilizations explained the world through myth. Religions preserve truth through narrative. Families pass down their history through story. We remember our grandparents through stories. We remember our childhood through stories. We even remember ourselves through story. The question is not whether we are storytellers. The question is whether we are telling the right story. You see, one of the most famous principles in narrative therapy is the idea that the person is not the problem. The problem is the problem. And at first glance, that sounds like a catchy slogan that you might find stitched into a decorative pillow or a cat hanging from a limb. Hang in there. But the more we think about it, the more revolutionary it becomes. We have a tendency to fuse ourselves within our struggles. Anxiety stops being something we experience and becomes who we are. Depression stops being a battle and becomes our identity. Failure stops being an event and becomes our permanent label. We stop speaking about these things as visitors in our lives and begin treating them as the architects of our existence. Narrative therapy attempts to create distance between the person and the problem. Instead of asking, why am I broken? It might ask something like, when did this problem first begin influencing my story? Now that shift may seem small, but it changes everything because it transforms the problem from an identity, who we are, into something that we can examine. Now I think there's something deeply human about all of that. Honestly, if you were to pick up a novel and read only one chapter, you would never put that book down and assume that you understand the entire story. If you happen to open the book to its darkest chapter, you certainly wouldn't conclude that darkness was the whole point of the narrative. But the problem is, and something we don't realize, is we do this to ourselves every day. We're going to experience a season of suffering, and then we're going to begin treating it as if it's the final verdict on our entire existence. Perhaps this is why stories have always been such powerful teachers. Consider the stories that have been around for centuries. They're stories about people who encounter hardship and are transformed by it. Right? The hero who goes into the wilderness or the pilgrim who loses his way. The struggle is not the end of the story. It's often the very thing that gives the story meaning. What narrative therapy asks us to consider is whether we have prematurely ended our stories. Have we reached a difficult chapter and decided that, well, that's all there is? Have we mistaken a season for a destiny, and have we allowed pain to become the narrator? And if your life is truly a story, who's narrating it? Is that narrator trustworthy? Is the voice in your head telling the whole truth, or only part of it? Have you confused a wound for an identity? Have you mistaken a chapter for the entire book? Look, the most important chapters have yet to be written. Because one of the greatest tragedies of modern life is that people often lose hope precisely because they believe they already know how the story ends. Yet every great story contains moments when the ending appears impossible to imagine. Every great story contains darkness that only reveals its purpose later. The next chapter of your life may not erase the previous one. It may not undo your wounds or answer every question. But it may reveal that the story was larger, deeper, and more meaningful than you realized. And perhaps that possibility, that the story is not over yet, is where hope begins. Human beings are storytellers, not just around campfires or in novels or films, but in the quiet chambers of the mind where we interpret our past, explain our struggles, and decide who we believe we are. Every one of us carries a narrative about our life, about what went wrong, what matters, who the heroes were, and sometimes who the villains are. Psychology has increasingly begun to recognize that these inner narratives shape our identity far more than we realize. But here's the strange part. The events themselves are often less powerful than the story we build around them. Two people can walk through the same experience and come away with completely different interpretations. One story imprisons a person and another story gives them the strength to move forward. That idea sits at the heart of a fascinating psychological approach known as narrative therapy, which suggests that healing often begins when we learn to examine and sometimes rewrite the stories that define us. Today's guest is the cartographer of inner stories, the curator of lived mystery, and the architect of rewritten lives. Diane, welcome to Truth and Shadow Podcast.
Oh, thank you so much for having me.
I would like to start by offering you an opportunity to talk about what you're working on and the things that are available to you and how people can find more of your information.
Okay. So, I was a professor of psychotherapy for 27 years, and now I run a training institute that teaches therapists from around the world, actually, how to do therapy better and more effectively for the 21st century. And my work draws very, very heavily from narrative and postmodern approaches that we'll be talking about today. So I do probably have the most boring YouTube channel out there. I have all of my university lectures. I'm a textbook author, so I write theory textbooks for mental health professionals. So to help those students and professors, I have recorded, I probably now have over 100 university lectures on my Diane Gehart Ph.D. YouTube channel. So if you need help going to sleep at night, no, but it does go through about I probably have nearly 40 different psychotherapy theories and all the different, so you can get the inside scoop on what psychotherapists are doing. And then I do have a general website, dianegehart.com, which is where you can find me. I also have a private practice as a psychotherapist here in the Los Angeles area. And if you're a therapist listening to this, I do have an institute called Therapy That Works Institute, where I teach people how to do effective therapy.
Wonderful. Thank you for that. So like I said in the intro, we're going to talk a little bit about narrative therapy. And many people who are listening may not be familiar with what it is. And so when you use the term narrative, what exactly is meant by that? And are we talking about literal stories people tell about their lives? Or is this something deeper?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, narrative therapy is a very specific form of therapy. Anyone who is trained, we know that this, is starts out with the work of Michael White and David Epstein from actually Australia and New Zealand, down under, and there are of course practitioners around the globe, and we have folks here in the United States who also specialize in this approach. It's a newer approach, meaning last 30 years or so, in the world of psychotherapy. That's new. It falls under what's called postmodern or social construction. And so to your point and to your question, narrative therapy, it uses the narrative metaphor to understand how we construct meaning, how we construct our identities. And so it's not just about telling stories, but it's looking at how the stories we tell ourselves, the stories we get from our families, the stories we get from society, about who we should be, what happiness looks like, what success looks like, that all of these narratives, the formal term that is used is called a dominant discourse. And that is, each culture has a different set of dominant discourses that tell us what is good and what is not good in a given culture, what's polite, what's not polite. And so these shape us so much more than we realize in very profound ways. And it really shapes our identity, and it really affects our mental health.
Yeah, one of the things that I actually find fascinating with this kind of technique is that there's like a suggestion we don't just have these experiences. We actually organize them into stories that basically shape who we believe we are. So how does that process happen?
So using narrative therapy. You can think of it, I think one of the things that helped me the most to kind of understand this way of looking at the human experience is that, life happens, right? And whatever you can capture with a video camera, what people said, what people did, life happens. But what that means, whether it's good, whether it's bad, whether it's dangerous, um, that all comes down to a story we put on top of those objective, events. And so, something can happen in one person's life, and that could be, a wonderful thing. And in certain cultures or certain families, right? And in other families, it's not a big deal. Like, for example, a kid can bring a bee home in one family, and that can be celebrated. And in another family, that could be considered a huge failure. Similarly, someone could bring an A home in one family, and that's like, well, who really cares? Did you score any points in the game last night? That's what I'm worried about. And, in another family, it's the ultimate success. And these are all, these values that we have come to us through narratives. And they're these grand narratives that are very, very powerful. We often don't even realize we're measuring our value as a human and our success. The white picket fence story, right? With 2.5 kids and a dog and whatever, the nice car in the driveway. That's what success looks like. It's what it's supposed to look like. And a lot of people work really hard to conform to that dominant narrative of what happiness should look like. And they get there and they're like, wow, I'm not actually that happy. So that's some of how narrative looks at the human experience.
So basically, two people can go through basically the same event, right? So the white picket fence house, etc., and can go, this is great, or I'm not so happy. And that means, or does that mean basically that within our own story, our own interpretation, how is that compared to the event itself then?
Well, and that's, so it's a postmodern approach. There's no objective truth, so to speak, in terms of what those mean. And a lot of what happens in narrative therapy is, well, let's look at the narrative you got about what success should look like in your life. How is that working for you? Is it not? Is it, is what parts are not? And it's really bringing conscious choice, or what they might call agency, because most of us feel very powerless in our lives. And especially I think at this time in history, right? So looking at where we do have choice, and we have choice in terms of which story we buy into to define ourselves and define our lives and, shape our relationships. We have a lot more choice when you step back, you pause, and you look at it. Rather than seeing that these stories are defining who we are, the idea here is let's just put all the pieces, out on the table. Like I'll often, sometimes my clients will give me an interpretation. Let's say that B is a sign of total failure, right? And I'll say, like, so where did that idea come from? I'm just curious. I want to know, why is B a failure to you? Because I know in other people, B is a huge success, and everyone, and so little things like that really do add up to really shaping what we're anxious about, what we nag our partners about, what we're looking for in a partner, right? All of these things really shape us.
So basically, one of the things that I'm picking up here on that one is something that's commonly known as externalizing the problem. So we take whatever that issue is, and like you said, can you explain what this idea means to me so I can understand? So basically, the idea is that it's not the person that's the issue, it's the problem that's the issue. And so why is that shift so powerful for people in therapy?
Yeah, and that is certainly where narrative therapy really started. And it's a radical thought. And in fact, in narrative therapy, we talk about getting to know the person apart from the problem. So when the client comes in, like, let's meet them as a human being. Who are they, right? Before we ask about why they're here, what do they do for fun? Who's in their life? What are their dreams or hopes or aspirations? We get to just know the human being in front of us. And then we start asking, of course, about the problem. What brings you here? And so the idea of externalization, and sometimes it's very literal, and it doesn't work for everyone, but often it does, where let's say they're coming in, it's anxiety. They're always worrying, they can't sleep. And so, what can happen is there's this natural shift and this kind of conceptualization. So when anxiety is in charge, or when it's, kind of taken over, who are you? What do you do differently? And when anxiety isn't kind of running the show, who are you? What do you do differently? And just having this linguistic distinction, we can use it around ADHD, you can use it around, many different diagnoses. And what happens is you get a little bit of distance from your problem. And then the client, gets to see, oh, yeah, when ADHD isn't running the show or anxiety isn't running the show, this is who I am. And when it does get in charge, I start doing these kind of crazy things that I probably know I shouldn't be doing. And so you can say, so, is this a situation, you can move on to, is this a situation where you want to give, turn it over to anxiety to run the show? Or is this a situation where, maybe we can name a different part of you that might be better to be in charge? And so it can be very, very powerful in terms of helping people conceptualize their problems and actually think of new ways to relate to it. That's empowering, I think, is really what's so lovely about, it's kind of a metaphor of sorts, is that, oh yeah, I kind of do let OCD just take over and run the show, And so it's like, do I want to do that? I had one client where I was actually trying to do a very traditional for obsessive compulsive disorder, OCD. There's a very specific treatment called exposure therapy, which is, one of the best treatments, where you kind of go from the least scary to the most scary. And I had this one client when I was doing the evidence-based treatment thing, and he's like, you know what, Diane, I just can't do it this way. I just have to ambush OCD. You can't give me a homework assignment. I'm going to get anxious about it. I can't do it. So I've just decided I'm going to ambush OCD. And, at random points during the day, I'm just going to expose myself to everything that scares me. And I just had to laugh because we were trying to do this very behavioral, forget cognitive. It was a very behavioral approach, but it just didn't work. And when, we kind of naturally shifted into this, I'm going to ambush OCD, this very narrative way of thinking about the problem, it was just easier. It was lighthearted. It was, we'd have fun. Okay, well, good luck with the ambushing plans. And, how did the reconnaissance go? And, we just kind of had fun with it. It was a teenager, and it just became this much lighthearted way to interact with problems that really just gives a person a much greater sense of autonomy and agency and ability to do something different in relation to the problem.
With narrative therapy basically being about stories, then that kind of therapy would become something like helping somebody rewrite the script of their life, right? The story that we have made about ourselves.
Okay, that is a great question. And narrative therapists are very famous for having lots of different types of questions that they ask. So some of them are these externalizing questions in terms of, what happens when narrative therapy is in charge, right? And they'll actually do this counterintuitive thing of expanding. A client might come in and anxiety keeps me up at night. But by the time you're halfway through the session, we're looking at how it affects your marriage, your kids, your work life. You actually intentionally almost expand it, and which sounds counterintuitive. But then you flip the set of questions and you say, so how do you affect the life of the problem? So how are you affecting the problem? And then we go through the various rings of influence, looking at how, well, there are times where I manage my anxiety, when I'm with my kids this way, and I manage it when I'm at work this way, and I keep it reined in, when we go on vacation or whatever it is, right? So, and then all of a sudden you're done and you're like, wow, these are all the places I'm actually managing anxiety quite well, and these are the places where it takes over. And then we can have conversations about, so, are there any strategies that you're using and managing in certain contexts that might be good in these contexts where you don't like how much power it has over you?
Yeah, when I first was introduced to narrative therapy, it reminded me of Carl Jung. And then I started digging around and looking, and I found something that he had written, that basically human beings don't just live in stories, but we live in myths. And that also relates to a quote from a friend of mine who says, write your own gospel, live your own myth. And I think both of those ideas, either from Jung or my friend, that there's this connection between narrative therapy and the Jungian idea that our lives follow perhaps archetypical patterns. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, that is a really fascinating connection. And so I think I think where the overlap really is that, Jung was looking at these archetypes, these grand archetypes that we see over and over again in cultures around the world. He really was looking at, cultures. He's one of the first people from the West to really even understand and translate Eastern cultures in Asia. And so there are these archetypes and these myths are kind of grand narratives and grand stories. And I think where narrative comes in, it says, do you like that myth? Do you agree with it? Or do you want to shift it? And so a narrative, I think Jung does a great job looking at these grand patterns. Narrative therapy comes in and says, which of these patterns do you want to choose to live according to? And which ones do you want to shift and change the ending to? And so there's more of an emphasis on your conscious free will choice of either kind of signing up for it, editing the narrative, shifting it up, and choosing which one you want to be aligned with, consciously choosing that archetype or that myth or whatever the narrative, or rewriting the ending to that, mythic tale in a way that feels more true and honest for you.
That's a good answer. Thank you. And one of the things that I'm interested in within Jungian psychology, specifically the shadow self, shadow work, that particular view that there's these rejected or these hidden parts of ourselves that we lock away in a closet or something somewhere. And I'm wondering if narrative therapy could sometimes help people integrate that shadow self by changing how they frame those parts, those rejected parts of themselves into their story.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I'm going to say there is another piece that happens in narrative therapy and the related approach of collaborative therapy where I've done that, but that's where most of my research has been. Actually, they work together. I'll just say that. They're sister approaches. And the key in those approaches, though, they have all these, especially narrative has all these great questions. As a therapist, my students absolutely love it, right? As a textbook author, I'm always like, Michael, why did you have so many interventions, please? But there's a lot of, because it's a long chapter to write up. But the key really is that the relationship between the therapist and the client is very unique in narrative, and it uses this kind of collaborative approach, the sister approach, which is where you do this co-creation of meaning. And what the heck does that even mean, right? It sounds so weird. But what it is the clinician, the therapist really tries to enter the client's meaning-making system from a very curious perspective. So when I train my therapists, I put them through a 45-hour rigorous course. And I'm telling you, we spend half of it trying to get the therapist out of their narrative
Right.
and into the client's narrative, which is the hardest skill. Like once I tell my students, once you learn to do this, everything works, everything's easy. But the experience of having another human being, whether it's your therapist, your partner, your best friend, just suspend all of their beliefs, their values, their attitudes, just temporarily, we put them on the shelf and we try to follow along. And what I try to do is I tell my students, just get the movie, what happened, how did the person make sense of it, and track the interpretation process and understand how they experience their world from within their meaning-making system and not projecting any of ours into it. It's probably one of the hardest disciplines as a human. And so when you start tracking and listening this way, you're just curious, right? And you're just trying to sincerely understand. And when you have a relationship with somebody who is sitting there listening to your biggest problem in your life and just trying to understand what happened and exactly why it's hurt you the way it did or angered you the way you did. And they're just following. There is an emotional safety in that is very hard to replicate. And what happens in these conversations is I try to understand someone else's meaning making system. I stumble upon all of these little shadow parts and they poke their head out. And I said, why was that so scary? I mean, the metaphor I actually use, I'm going to take a minute to explain this metaphor, but it's the best way I've had to explain it. About 30 years ago, there was a version of Star Trek Enterprise with Jean-Luc Picard and Data and Deanna Troi, if you remember that one, where they had a recreation room called the holodeck, which is a room that someone else, the user would go and program, and you could create, a jungle scene, a court scene, your childhood, whatever, but you programmed the characters, you programmed the world and the logic of that world. Because VR headset, you're using someone else's app. It's not. So what I tell you're entering someone else's holodeck. So this world that they've programmed all the meaning. So in their world, the lion can be a prey animal, like a sweet little kitty cat, not dangerous at all. And in their world, the gazelle can be the apex predator, the most dangerous thing. You don't know it's safe and dangerous in their world till you're just blindfolded and all you have are your questions. So does this normally happen here? And how do these things go together, right? And as you suspend all of your assumptions and you ask folks to explain, why is that scary? Why is that dangerous? How is that upsetting? Where does your mind go to when you're upset about X, Y, and Z? What story keeps playing over and over? All of those shadow elements just kind of tumble out in a very gentle way as the other person's trying to make sense of it. And so that is where those elements come out. And when you create a safe enough place to explore those with curiosity rather than judgment, it totally shifts your relationship to those shadow parts very quickly and in a very gentle, easy way, if that makes sense. No, normally none of us want to see those shadow parts. Best to keep them hidden. And this creates a very safe context in which to explore those because they're not being judged. We're just trying to understand how they operate.
Yeah, no, that's good. I appreciate that answer. One of the things that I was kind of pondering here is that if we have somebody who views themselves only as a victim in their story, because I'm sure this happens, introducing them to some kind of archetypal framework, the hero or something like that, could that help them shift this self-narrative, this story that they tell themselves, that they're not the victim, they're the hero, but they're in the middle of a journey? How can that help rewrite that life story?
So, certainly introducing either ways in which there might be a heroic way forward or ways in which they've already been a hero. In narrative, what they would look for is what they would call all of the unique outcomes or sparkling moments is the word they call. And they would actually look back. So trying to tell someone, well, there's a heroic way out of this, most people don't want to hear it. And most people do feel victimized when they come into therapy. That's why they're there. So saying you're not necessarily the victim, none of us want to hear that when we're feeling like a victim, right? We're feeling victimized. So instead, what narrative therapy does is it looks back in the past, usually, or to the present, and it looks for these sparkling moments where you could have been a victim, but you weren't, or you could have been, felt totally powerless, but you found a way to have some agency, and you consciously make a decision to do something a little bit different. And so you go back to their current narrative and you look for real existing evidence where they drew the line in the sand and they were not the victim. And then you're building from fact, then you're building from real events, parts of them that already exist, which then you can say, are there any way you want to use some of those skills, those parts of yourself, moving forward? And so again, the more that the client can come up and to see with evidence that they just gave us, gave themselves, and they can see how to use that going forward. That is generally how they create their heroic narrative, but it's usually not me giving it to them in this type of approach, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes good sense. Yeah, one of the things that's part of this is the cultural influence on our personal stories. A cultural anthropologist will say that not only is there a big culture, but within that culture are subcultures. So each individual may be part of a couple of different subcultures at the same time. How does that right there deal with helping people out, helping people examine the narrative of their life within their own cultural constraints, if you will?
Yeah, that's a great question. In narrative therapy, of all the major theoretical orientations, narrative is the most kind of builds in an awareness of these cultural discourses that really shape us in very profound, intimate ways. And often we take those in without even reflecting on them. So we all have a dominant, maybe, national culture we're a part of, but then we're all part of multiple subcultures. And I would even argue our families are little microcultures unto themselves, right? No matter what ethnic group or social class you're from, your family is very different. And I always like to say when I train people to be therapists, that you really can't assume anything based on a person's cultural narratives, because if you think about it, the person who is going to be closest in usually, age, social class, ethnicity, right, race, um, religious views, all of that is going to be one of your siblings, okay? And so theoretically, your sibling and you should have a very similar holodeck. But I don't know about you if you have siblings. I got two. And let me tell you, our worlds that we inhabit and our meaning making systems are extremely different. So even the person who is most likely to think and, have cultural views, and we're using culture very broadly here, it can be social culture, it can be, region of the country, or, ethnicity, race, all that stuff. The person who see the world the most likely like you as your sibling, and most siblings see the world very, very different. And so there's even this very unique individual interpretation, like let's say even of gender, right? So you can, even gender, every person has a very unique interpretation of how they do that, what part of a gender narrative you ascribe to. So it's very fascinating to watch how quickly these grand narratives kind of break down at an individual level, and how all of us are really choosing, often not very consciously though, which parts of those narratives we're going to organize our life and judge our life by. And that's where this becomes so powerful. It's like, let's pause. Let's look what you bought into as to what success, what happiness, what your life should look like. What have you bought into, hook, line, and sinker? And is that truly what you want for your life?
Yeah, dig a little deeper into this one. Some of those environments that we gain, the stories we identify, can come from obviously our parents, siblings, sure, but also from our teachers or any kind of institution that we're part of. How do you help someone recognize when basically they have adopted a narrative that's more, I'm going to use external, like an external identity of locus, basically, is what I'm asking. So how do you help somebody say, this is not my own narrative?
Yeah, absolutely. And I do that by, often asking, in a nuts and bolts way in session, I ask them, so where did you get the idea that, getting a B is ultimate failure? Where do you think that story came from? And oftentimes people will say, I don't know. And that's my favorite part of the session. And I'm like, so let's take a guess. Where might it have come from? And it doesn't take long till we find the little rabbit trail that leads us to that. But we also get this from our friends. I mean, the music we listen to, the social media feeds, right? What we read for news, the religion, who our neighbors are, who we're comparing ourselves to, who's, what profession we have, right? And what our coworkers are doing. So there's so many places of influence that we're not taking in a lot of it. I mean, that's really fascinating when you start looking, things like, movies. People don't realize how that Cinderella fairy tale, right, ending, how profound that can shape a person's idea of what their life should look like.
Yeah, those Hallmark movies.
Yep.
Oh, jeez. Right.
Yep.
Oh, man. Hallmark movies are one of the best, right? That just tell everybody what life is like, right?
Yeah, what your life's supposed to look like, and you'll know. It's funny. A lot of the rom-coms, which I have to admit I like watching, but really that is like this is a narcissist falling in love with how to fall in love with a narcissist, and this magical ending that isn't what normally happens, and so they all end up in therapy going, "What happened? It looked just like the movie." I'm like, yeah, those movies. If all that stuff happens in the beginning, the girl doesn't, the guy or whoever doesn't turn around the cure the personality disorder. So whichever direction the rom-com one will often have the that particular narrative. It's like, no, if someone's treating you badly and you suddenly convince them to fall in love with you, that usually doesn't have a happy ending.
Red flags, man.
Red flags, man. Exactly.
Well, if we look at something like myth and folklore, we see that transformation in these stories, and I really think I haven't examined every kind of culture, of course not, but I do believe a lot of cultures have stories where you have a hero or a person descending into chaos, in the darkness, right, or into a forest. I mean, any kind of thing that's like this other world, basically. Do you see anything similar to that in the narrative therapy, where people often have to confront painful parts of their story before a new narrative can emerge?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think most people who come to therapy, they normally are not shopping around for a narrative therapist, let's be clear, but they are in that in a dark place. And I think Carl Jung talked about the hero's journey and going through that challenge, right? And it is what most movies are about, some version of that hero narrative. And I think to a certain extent that happens in everyone's life. And I often joke that I am very much, if you're familiar with the Inferno, and I am Virgil in Dante's Inferno, giving people I'm a tour guide of hell. That is kind of what it means to be a therapist. And I know how to navigate. I know how to get through. I know where the exit ramps are. And I kind of just walk with people through hell until we can find our way out. And that's kind of that dark forest. And for whatever reason, I'll let the listeners decide what reason. I do think most of us, if not all of us, go through these moments. It seems to be part of the human condition, part of the human journey. For some of us, it happens very early in our journey. For some of us, we can go decades without getting lost in the forest. And it's very shocking in a different way when it happens after many years of life being pretty easy. But it does seem to be a very common theme in the human condition.
And one of the things on building on that is when we finally start looking at and confronting this dark path, these darkness, the chaos, the shadow, do we find moments, or have you experienced moments where a client or someone reframes what they had thought was maybe the darkest chapter in their life and realize it actually contains some kind of strength or greater meaning for their lives?
I would say virtually always. If you do the work, I would say almost always, those dark moments either they give birth to something else, and they allow you to live life in a whole different way, or to give back to humanity in a whole different way. And that when you move through those dark moments with grace rather than despair, if you can find a way to do that, I've never seen it not lead to something better. And so I think it's having the courage, and it's really courage is what I would say. Those are the moments, and in a lot of ways in the 21st century, a lot of our suffering comes down to a failure of courage, as strange as that may sound. But when you have the courage to really face these things head on and embrace them and be curious and learn from them and grow from them, it always leads to something better, and usually very surprising, in surprising ways, in ways you would never predict.
I'm going to build on that a little bit too. Typically, what I have researched about helping kind of individuals with phobias is introducing them to the thing they're afraid of. One that I've seen is someone's afraid of crossing over water, and I mean like, gosh, here in Oregon we have the Willamette River, so crossing, over the I-5 bridge, which is a double-decker bridge high above the Willamette River, could scare somebody who has a big phobia of crossing over water. And so within that defeating that phobia is you go, okay, well, just drive up to where the bridge begins, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
So within narrative therapy, what is something that's similar to that when we're trying to say, this is the thing that is not me, but I have been identifying with it? What are some of those techniques?
So, so something similar to that would be exposure therapy, driving up. And so, in narrative, they would do that in gentle ways and often starting by asking curious questions about it. And they kind of would be curious in terms of, what the fear is. Now, with phobias, the research would generally say, oftentimes we know it's irrational, most people do, but just still exploring where that may have come from, the history that it came from. They would look for those sparkling moments and unique outcomes when they were able to go over the water and what was happening then. They'd be all curious about that. And maybe from that, we'd find one or two things we might try, and then we'd go experiment with that. But you'd start with what's familiar. And then you'd explore some of those exceptions, those unique outcomes, take those little, almost like innate, natural, organic ways of overcoming that phobia and slowly build on those to get us to where we want to go.
So basically taking and saying, hey, this is the object, and I can put it as far away from me as I want, or as close to myself as I want, kind of thing. In the exposure therapy thing, but doing it in narration style.
Yeah.
Okay. So if somebody listening basically realizes that they may be trapped inside of some kind of, I'm going to use the word harmful, and I don't mean self-harm. I just mean a negative or a darker, chaotic shadow of themselves. So if they're stuck in this dark narrative about themselves, what is one of the first steps that they can take towards examining that story?
Well, I think one of the first steps is to look at maybe where it came from. Where did it begin? What were the influences, right, that maybe shaped that? Was it from the family? Was it from friends? Was it from a bad breakup? Like, just even doing an archaeology of the meaning, like, where did all of these interpretations come from? And so noticing that, and then noticing, is there any that you don't agree with? Because the truth is, a lot of the thoughts that go through our heads and emotions we experience, we don't even agree with, right? So even exploring, just starting there, right? Do you even believe the story? Do you like the story? You tell yourself. Well, when I ask my clients that, normally they can even from the day one say, well, only 70% of me believes that. Only half of me believes that. You can normally just start right there. And then you can say, so tell me about the part that does believe all of this negative stuff about you, and tell me about the part that doesn't. And let's, explore those. And then who are you when you fall into that kind of darker interpretation of things? And, what's the part of you? Can you give it a name that doesn't believe that? And who is that person? What influenced that? Right? And which one of these ways of being in the world do you prefer? Okay, if you prefer the lighter version, so what would be the first smallest step to move in that direction? And so there's a lot of choice, and agency is very important, like choosing which of these stories you want to live according to. And that kind of gets me to a related intervention or metaphor I use that might be easy to get, from listening to this podcast. There's something I call it decision doors. Is a metaphor I use when you have to make really difficult decisions in life. Because most of our decisions, we might have 3 or 4 options, and especially in today's world, we don't like any of them. None of them gets us exactly where we want to go. And so I think of each option we have, right? I mean, you can work right now. The cost of living is really hard for a lot of people, right? So, one option is to work more, right? You have 40 hours, let's do 60. Another option is to just work 40 and try to lower expenses. Another option is to keep, who knows, right? Move someplace different. So let's line up all of your options, right? And and so I think of each option as a door, and each door has these sparkling things behind it that we want, but each door also has known problems and potential risks. And so you want to line up all your doors with all of their sparkling objects, all their known problems and risks. And you want to, and I, especially, well, we're talking with money, I put it in a spreadsheet. I make my clients put it in a spreadsheet. And then I think the key in life is to say which of these problems, and you got to pick the door for which of these problems and risks are you willing to live with without whining or complaining about it. So that once you cross that threshold, you're like, yep, I'm going to go work 60 hours a week, which doesn't sound fun, but I'm going to have more financial security and I don't have to move and I can support my kids in the way that makes me feel good as a parent. Okay, then don't whine and complain about those 60 hours. Let's problem solve and build it in, or I'm not going to work 60 hours a week. I want the 40-hour door and I'm going to downsize my living circumstances because that feels right to me. Okay, then go through that door and don't whine. You're going to have a longer commute or whatever it is. And just that's part of the plan. Listen to podcasts. Okay, whatever it might be. So when you move through life with both your big decisions and little decisions this way, it really it helps you, realize you have free will choice and how you handle the cost of living right now, let's say. You have free will choice, and there's always another set of doors down the road. Don't worry. Life always throws challenges at you. But when you start moving through life saying, I have choices, and you want to choose the door that has the problems you can live with without whining and complaining, and that you get those sparkling objects on the other side, and you begin to really embody that sense of agency and shaping your narrative.
And something that I was thinking about is we examine the narrative therapy and we understand that some of our self story comes from external sources, culture, family, etc. I'm curious as to how important having relationships that can actually help us fix our self story, our narrative story, and help to reinforce a positive life, helping us basically to rewrite these narratives.
I think that is so important. I think who we choose to be our friends, who we choose to share our story with, and how much of our story and how they shape that story. There's research that who you complain to your partner about significantly affects the health of that your marriage or your relationship. And we often don't think about it, right? We just got a friend who got an ear, I'm upset, and just like who you vent to actually really affects your happiness level and even the direction of your life more than you realize. And so, but even the music you listen to, right? And the movies you watch and the podcasts you listen to, they are shaping us in very profound ways. And most of us aren't critical. So I think choosing your friends and your partners wisely is one of the most important choices in life, and who you share your story with, and because we shape each other's story, and you want to find someone who's going to cheer you on as the hero to your story rather than constantly question you and get you to see the negative in yourself or the negative in others. It's so destructive, although it's lucrative. So a lot of the media we see has this negative, it brings us down. And then, I challenge you to, to be thoughtful about the stories you expose yourself to, because whether you realize it or not, When you go to that movie or that, listen to the podcast or read a book or follow someone on social media, that is shaping your own view of how you judge your life and the life that you live, and it's shaping the story you tell yourself about your value in this world and what life's all about.
So when you step back from your work, what is the most hopeful thing that you've seen happen when people begin changing the story they believe about themselves?
It is that even with the worst of circumstances, there is always a way through. I have worked with people with stories, and I hear unspeakable suffering. And I remember after 10 years of doing this work, I've been doing it for over 30. I remember thinking, okay, I've heard it. I've heard all the horrible things humans can do to another. I have not. I've been doing it year after year, week after week. I am blown away by what humanity is capable of, right? And yet, through it all, there are processes like narrative therapy and a journey you get set off on that is just magical. It is transformative. You reconnect with why we are human and the beauty of this human journey that we have as well. And so there is suffering, but there is also, the hero's journey, triumphing through suffering, is available really to everyone who embarks on that journey. As many, I know there's people listening, but there's so many. Yes, there are so many challenges. There are so many things working against us. It feels like in the 21st century, and we also live at the most magical time. So I think we have some of the worst factors going on in history right now, and we have some magic happening in the world right now. We have a lot of good and a lot of bad, and so you have a lot to work with in terms of navigating the challenges that we are seeing as well.
If you can give listeners one simple question they can ask themselves about the story they're living in, what would that question be?
Am I choosing on a daily basis to live according to what matters most to me? Do I even agreeing with the choices I make? Right? And even the little ones, from when you get up, what you do with your day, how you speak to other people. It's the little decisions, it's the little choices we make that shape our destinies in huge ways. We focus a lot on the big decisions, but we forget about, did we get up? Did we work out? Did we connect with something positive? Did we bring positivity to the people who crossed our paths? These little decisions shape our lives and our mental health far more than most of us realize.
And then finally, if human beings are storytelling creatures, but finally, if human beings are storytelling creatures at our core, what does a healthy life narrative look like from your view?
It's a great question. And our minds are narrative. We think in stories, we remember. Our brains need to put our experience into narrative. We are psychologically hardwired for narrative. And so I would say, as we're, is to look for all the ways that you do shape your narrative. We all focus on the ways that other people impede upon the narrative we prefer. And it's very easy to fall into a victim mentality. And especially in today's world, it's fascinating to watch how social media and the internet has really gotten a lot of people into a very victim narrative. And I think the challenge really is, but every single day, you still have free will choice, to how you handle injustice, hard times, problems that you feel like you shouldn't have to deal with, right? You still have free will choice and how you navigate those challenges. And when that kind of clicks in, I think life feels a whole lot better, even in these very difficult times that we are living in.
That's good. Appreciate that. Go ahead and drop your information again one more time. Your deets, basically, is what we call it. website, YouTube, and some of the goals, focuses of your process again.
Yeah. So you can find me on YouTube, and I have lots of lectures about psychotherapy there, and that's Diane Gehart. The last name is spelled, it's DianeGehart, and that's also my website, dianegehart.com. And if you are a therapist and want to get some training with me, you can find me at therapythatworksinstitute.com, where I teach therapists how to work in some of the ways that we've been talking about today.
Well, I appreciate your time, and thank you very much for coming on my show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
You take the blue pill, the story ends. You wake up in your bed and believe whatever you want to believe. You take the red pill, you stay in Wonderland, and I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes.
Thank you for listening. This is a free podcast based upon the value for value model. If you find value in this, or any episode, you can return that value by liking the show, subscribing to this channel, leaving a review, or sharing with a friend on your social media accounts. You can also donate on my website. Thank you again. This is BT for Truth and Shadow Podcast. You are the light in the darkness.
And I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes. And I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes. And I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes.
It's a very strange, funny time where everybody would love to be able to be themselves, but they can't, because they must fall in line with the person in front of them.
The terrible thing about searching for the truth is that sometimes you find it.
Take the red pill. Remember, all I'm offering is the truth, nothing more. You stay in Wonderland. Believe whatever you want to believe.
See, the more at peace you become, the less you tolerate chaos. You stop explaining yourself to people committed to misunderstanding you.
You want to live that kind of life? I wish you the best. I'll be on the other side somewhere.
Protecting your peace isn't about shutting the world out. It's about keeping your inner world clear enough to hear your own soul.
The truth, nothing more.